Hello, I'm Bill LuMaye, and thank you for watching Community Matters. We hope you'll continue to watch as we discuss issues facing our community and provide you with the resources and information needed to find solutions. This week, we're learning about traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs. TBIs have been in the conversation lately around professional and youth sports, but unfortunately, they aren't exclusive to the football field. Here to talk to us about traumatic brain injuries is Thomas Henson, a personal injury lawyer at Henson Fuerst and appointed member of the North Carolina Brain Injury Advisory Council and a board member at the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start out with something really basic. TBI, what is it?
Well, you know, traumatic brain injury is just a fancy word for a blow or a jolt to the head that disrupts brain function. It is generally characterized as mild to severe. Mild is more of a minor concussion, all the way up to situations where there's a bleed on the brain from some kind of trauma. Or even a coma. So it really covers a spectrum of different varying levels of brain dysfunction based on some kind of trauma.
When you think of it traumatic, I'm thinking of a blow to the head, but it's not always a blow to the head.
It isn't, and that's one of the big misconceptions about traumatic brain injury is that you have to have a direct hit to the head or to the brain to cause a concussion. But we've all seen football players, for instance, in the NFL take a hard hit. They don't necessarily get a hit to the head, right, but they just get a hard jolt to the body, and that jolt is enough to really shake the brain inside of the skull, kind of like an egg would shake inside the shell. And when that brain gets shaken, it can cause damage to the nerve cells in the brain and really disrupt brain function and therefore cause a concussion.
That brings up the shaken baby syndrome.
Yeah, exactly,
right?
Exactly. There's a lot of the shaken baby cases or incidents really don't involve a blow to the head, as the name would imply. It's just the shaking back and forth of the infant and the resulting trauma to the infant's brain.
Well, how common is this?
It's very common. The CDC estimates maybe 1.5 million people a year in the United States sustain some sort of traumatic brain injury. And of course, if you call traumatic brain injury, at least a minor traumatic brain injury, by the name concussion, then obviously, as you mentioned in the opening, concussion is part of the national conversation, and it's a lot more common. And I think that paints things with a different picture for the general public when they start thinking about concussion as really a form of traumatic brain injury, because that's what it is.
Yeah, I never thought that. When I was a kid, I played football, sandlot football and that. I think everybody I knew got a concussion at some point, and it was shake it off, shake it off. We didn't really pay attention to it.
No, not at all. And as we all know, the common phrase is get your bell rung or seeing stars. And it was just, you'll be fine, shake it off, get a cup of water and go back out on the field. And as medical literature is reflecting, and as science has learned over the last decade or so especially, these injuries are not to be taken lightly.
For someone who really doesn't know what a concussion is, what are some of the symptoms?
Typically, headache is a common symptom. Fuzziness of thought, cognitive issues, memory, not really having an awareness of where you are. There's that alert and oriented ×3 that sometimes we see in medical records in terms of do you know where you are, what time it is, and that type of thing. So fatigue is often a symptom that you see. Vision, double vision, blurry vision, things of that nature. So anything that just indicates cognitive issues really is something to be on the lookout for.
And I know there's varying degrees. You had mentioned that at the very top, where the concussion is, I guess, the least of it, right? But it can go all the way up. I was telling you before we went on the air that, I had a sister who was impacted by that and was in a coma for a week. So the recovery time I guess what I'm asking is, the brain in its recovery still is a bit of a mystery, isn't it? And it's unique to every individual.
It really is, and you're right, the vast majority of people on the concussion end of the spectrum do recover. The medical literature estimates between 90 and 95% of concussion victims ultimately have a good recovery. But there's this 5 to 10% that doctors and the medical profession refer to as the miserable minority who do not recover, and they suffer longer term and sometimes permanent what's called persistent post-concussive syndrome, where those cognitive deficits can last literally a lifetime and impact work and family life and things that you might expect.
From just a concussion?
From just a concussion.
Really?
So yeah, and that's hard to really wrap your mind around, because when you see somebody who looks normal, they have no outward signs of a physical injury, but yet they're acting, their memory's bad, or they have these other indications of a brain injury simply from a concussion. That is something that is absolutely supported in the medical literature, and doctors will tell you is a real problem for some people.
How would you diagnose something like that? Just from you're not a doctor, but I mean, what do they look for, in order to try to catch something like that early? And I don't know if that matters or not. I would assume it does. It does,
and you're right, absolutely the qualifier of I'm not a physician, but traditionally what concussion specialists or head injury specialists do, for instance, if you go to the emergency room, they'll obviously do a physical exam and just check your whole body out, but they'll also do more specific neurological exams. We've all had the experience of the doctor saying, follow my finger. Mm-hmm. That's one of those tests where they're just gazing to see, they're looking to see how your brain is functioning with certain tests that can really illuminate those issues. On the severe end of the spectrum, like your sister, obviously that gets much more complicated in terms of managing a severe brain injury, where that may be a subdural hematoma or a brain bleed. Sometimes the neurosurgeons have to go in and kind of drain that blood off of the brain, and other more complicated medical management techniques. So it really is very individual to start with, but then also the spectrum of treatment varies significantly with the type of injury as well.
And a lot of this is preventable, isn't it?
It can be, and I spend a lot of my time, not only in my role as a Brain Injury Association of North Carolina board member, but also as a personal injury lawyer, and especially in the cycling world. I do a lot of cycling and do a lot of presenting and talking to groups about concussion prevention. The obvious one, if in an activities and an athletic sense, is wear a helmet, and that has become a mantra that we're all familiar with, but it is amazing how often I see kids in my own neighborhood out riding a skateboard or a scooter or even a bike, and I think there's this misconception that if you're only riding your skateboard around the cul-de-sac, that that's somehow different than riding your skateboard down to the mall, and it really isn't. It takes one small blip of a skateboard hitting a rock, and all of a sudden the child's on the pavement. So wearing a helmet is very important. From a fall prevention standpoint, and it's interesting, falls actually account for about a little less than 50% of all traumatic brain injuries. So fall prevention is very important, not only for kids and putting like guards up on stairs so they won't fall down the stairs, but putting padding around fireplaces, things like that. So if a toddler trips and falls and hits their head on the fireplace, for instance, that there's a cushion there. Even for adults, and maybe especially for elderly adults, removing all kinds of slip or trip hazards. If there's things in the bathroom that need to be gotten out of the way so that people don't fall on them, it's very small things that can be done that make a huge difference.
We've come a long way, because I remember our playground was built over cement.
That's right.
Boom, down that slide. So
yeah, exactly.
We are learning. Please don't go away. We're going to come right back, and we're talking about TBIs, and there's a lot more to learn, and we'll talk more about prevention and common causes, and something in the law that has, I think, come about that will help a lot of our kids. So stick around.